Hello, good evening. Buenas noches, buenas tardes, buenos dias, wherever you happen to be in the world. Thank you for tuning in, coming to hang out with me live tonight. I am a wee bit tardy, so if you're like, Adelia, I thought you were going live earlier. Girl, me too. But if you are watching the replay, thank you for watching as well. Tonight, we're going to talk about some of the mistakes people make when they move abroad. Before we get into that, just in case there is someone new joining us tonight who might not know who I am or what we do here, my name is Adelia Borashade. I am also known as Picky Girl Travels the World. This is my YouTube channel. It is a place where we talk about travel, primarily solo travel. We talk about living abroad, which I have been doing for the last 8 years. And we also talk about money because without money, it's really hard to do anything. And so, if those are topics of interest to you, welcome. You found your people. You should absolutely subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, when I go live the next time or I upload a video, you'll be the first to know. So, hello to the folks who are here live. Hello again to the folks who are watching in the future. Now, I know the thumbnail for this video talked about expat money mistakes. I think this video is primarily for expats, the people who move abroad with the intention of going back to their home country. But I think those of you who are considering immigrating to another country, like I have immigrated to Mexico, it is the place I consider to be home now. I think there are also some useful things for you as well. So I don't want anybody to feel like this is not applicable to them. If you are going to be living abroad for, let's say, years or maybe indefinitely, this conversation is for you. Now, I have done several videos, which I did not remember to link, but if you're watching this in the future, I will link in the description about like what are some money moves that you should make before you leave the country. I have made a video on, I just lost the thought, but applicable videos, I'm going to link in the description. They're not there now, but they will be. So we will get to it. These are 5 money mistakes that I think you would do well to avoid when you are moving out of the country, either temporarily or longer term, permanently. Because like I said, there are a lot of reasons why you would leave. Okay. Something to consider is that location matters. Depending where it is that you're going to move abroad, it matters because in the US, we're very much used to using credit cards. What is it called when you tap your phone or your watch to pay? I sound like a dinosaur, but I don't use that service. But like all of those easy payment kinds of things, we're very used to in the United States. Depending on the country that you move to, those things may or may not be available. So, for example, Latin America tends to be very, very cash based. Um, that is not to say that you cannot use your credit cards here, but cash is definitely king, which is very different than, let's say, Western Europe. So that's something to consider. Okay, first mistake I would say that you need to make sure you avoid is uh, closing credit cards or bank accounts. Because people sometimes get into their minds like, I'm leaving this country, I'm never ever coming back. And like I want to cut ties completely. And so um oh, I just realized what you said, Dee, that my name is misspelled up there. Okay, I'll fix it. But yeah, there are people who are very determined to cut ties with the US. And while I understand the sentiment, it is not the wisest thing to do. One, if you close accounts, you are going to get dinged on your credit score. And I have said many times that, like, having a high credit score or your credit score in general is not the be all and end all. But if you are going to return to the US, you want to keep your credit intact. You want to protect your credit score as best you could. Um, Not having an address in the United States makes banking very difficult. It may make other things difficult as well. Um, so instead of, let's say, del- closing out those accounts. I'd make sure that they were like paid up, but I would not close any bank accounts. I would not close any credit cards. Even if you don't think you're going to be back in the US, you may find that you have need to open a new credit card. That's incredibly hard to do if you don't have a US address, or there is a family member who you want to take out a loan to help or what have you. There are all kind of unforeseen circumstances that could come up, and not having those things are going to make your life super super difficult. Okay? So that's number 1. Um I would also make sure I kept my US bank account for something as mundane as having my tax return deposited there, because the IRS does not issue checks in other currencies. So I've seen this happen where people have gotten their IRS refund check and they're in a country whose currency is not the US dollar, and they're very confused why they can't find a bank to cash the check at. And so having your bank account and doing direct deposit definitely makes your life easier there. Okay. Um, Number 2, and this for me is probably the biggest one, and this I think goes with when you're doing your research about the country you're either being relocated to for work, or if you're moving yourself, this is definitely something to look into, because often people who are moving abroad without the benefit of a job and are just doing it themselves, you will hear other people, other foreigners, particularly US Americans, talk about, well, I get by without a bank account. Um, and while that is true, the way banks and financial institutions work in other countries are often very different, and that's something to take into consideration. Okay. So, a mistake that you want to avoid is failing to find out about banking differences. And there are a whole host of things that could be different. There are, if you're used to using an ATM card with a 4-digit code, there are countries that don't use 4-digit codes, they use 6-digit codes. And that's a conversation to have with your US bank about the country you are relocating to before you make the move, because there is nothing like being on the other side of the world needing to get money out of the ATM only to find out that you can't, and it's the middle of the night back home where the bank is located and there's nobody there to take your call. um, I didn't realize that some people did this. I'm curious if there's anybody here tonight, like when you put in the code for your ATM PIN, are you using the numbers or the letters? Like, are you making a word out of it, or you remembered it's AFGX? Because if you're going to, let's say, a country like China, maybe even Japan, they don't use the same alphabet. So there's no guarantee that the same letters are going, one, to exist on the ATM keypad, and two, be associated with the same numbers in the same way. I had never really thought about that because when I memorize my pins, it's all about numbers. I've never used letters, but turns out some people do that. Um, Another banking difference, and I will admit that this is a mistake I made, but in my defense, uh, I found out I was moving to this country like a matter of days before I made the move. So I didn't have enough time to really research this, and I made some assumptions, and it bit me in the butt. Um, Moving funds between accounts. Um, we're very used to doing that in the US. You know, you transfer money from this account to this account, whether it's with the same institution or it's a different one. That may not work the same overseas, um, particularly when you're moving money between one country and another. You know, the US has its anti-money laundering laws and policies, but other countries do as well. They will often have a limit on how much you can convert in a single day, because that's the other thing. You've got money in your foreign bank account in the foreign currency. Um, Generally speaking, most US Americans do not have bank accounts in the US that accept foreign currency. So there has to be some kind of conversion that takes place. I'm thinking in particular of China, but there are other countries who have currency controls in place that limit how much you can exchange in a given time period. They limit how much you can send out of the country. They may require additional paperwork. That was true when I lived in China. In order for me to wire money from my Chinese account to my US account, I had to provide tax certificates that proved I had paid taxes appropriate for the amount of money I was trying to send out of the country, because they were not having it with people who were trying to avoid paying income tax. Um, okay. Michelle says, I don't recall having a problem anywhere in Asia with that issue. There are numbers on the keyboard, ATM, whatever currency. I find that a lot of times when I put in my US bank card, the machines will generally default to English, but that is not always the case. And so, you know, that's something to be prepared for as well, is having to navigate the I forgot just that quick where I was going with that. Um, I don't know. It'll come back to me. D from Brown Girls Invest Too. I have to move my rent money in 2 transactions to cover my rent, and 3 transactions if I'm paying my utility bills. Yeah, and that requires you to think ahead. Like, I've been caught out like that, particularly in my previous apartment where my landlord preferred to be paid in cash. I could not just the day before rent was due always be able to get sufficient cash out of the ATM for a variety of reasons. So I'd need to make sure that I, planned my multiple trips with enough time in case something didn't go like when the peso was significantly stronger than the dollar, the amount of money I was asking to get out, which I previously could get out in a single transaction before, but because the exchange rate had changed so much, that was no longer gonna work, and they disabled my card, and it was a whole thing. It was a whole thing. Um, so, finding out if that country has any kind of currency controls, any kind of limits, requirements, things like that. Um, you know, understanding that it's a good idea to make sure that the cards, particularly credit cards that you're using when you are overseas, don't have foreign transaction fees with them if you can avoid it. Um, and speaking of credit cards, understanding how credit works in the country. Um, Particularly for the expats, the folks who are moving abroad and they've got a job, usually a lot of stuff will get paid for by your employer. You'll probably get like hardship pay. So a lot of people like spending significant amount of time in their career overseas can be a bit of a financial boom for them, right? And I saw this a lot when I was teaching at international schools where folks are their expenses are fairly low because, typically your housing is covered, your transportation might be covered, all of that kind of stuff. And so people were able to kind of like elevate their lifestyle a little bit, and folks got to opening credit cards in the new country, taking out car loans, things like that. And there is nothing wrong with that. But it is important to know that credit and loans do not necessarily work the same all over the world. If you default on a credit card in the US or you don't make a car payment, there is, we know what to expect. They will repossess the car, they will ding your credit report, things like that. But I'm thinking particularly Middle Eastern countries, because that's where I saw this happen more often. Um, Often you can't leave the country if you are not in good standing with the bank. So having an outstanding loan, a loan that is not in good standing, those would be reasons for them to detain you or keep you from leaving the country. And so we want to make sure that we don't make those assumptions that the consequences of such actions would be the same. I will add, let's also another banking difference. In the US, I know I am very spoiled and expect to have a free banking option. I don't pay banking fees. I don't pay a fee for the privilege of having an account. Um, I don't. I try not to. Like I would never have a credit card with a high double-digit interest rate, and when I say high, I mean like 76%, which is pretty normal here in Mexico. And so, like my bank here in the app, they keep sending me this thing about, girl, here's this credit card. We want to give you credit because I know often, because we're coming from the US system, we think, okay, I'm in this new country. I need to establish a credit history, particularly if you're thinking about doing some investing or buying property or something like that. Having a credit history in your new country is going to be beneficial. And my bank has really been on me to get this credit card. And when I was reading like the details as best as I could, because it was all in Spanish, they were like, and they were going to give me a great interest rate. My interest rate was only going to be 36% instead of the regular like 75, 76%. Um, it Exactly. It is wild. And then something I also found out here about credit cards and loan payments, they charge you tax on those. I had never heard of that. So, if I were to get this credit card that had a whopping spending limit of less than $2,000 US, it was going to come with 36% interest rate, and there was an annual fee. That's also something I am spoiled by the US with is like I don't have cards that have annual fees. So this is what I mean. You want to make sure that you ask some questions because the way banking works is not universal. And so those are important things to like make sure you understand. Another thing here, bank accounts often have insurance that you pay on, and I would bet credit cards do as well. And so that's one reason that many people here opt out of having a local bank account. I can't say that mine has been super, super useful, but I this is an account I opened up 6, 7 years ago when I used to work here and I needed to be paid. Question. Whoops, wrong question. Was it just heavy marketing or did they make it seem like it was a requirement? No, they did make it seem like a requirement, but they were very much trying to um, entice me. Um, there's a lot of like so many months without interest. And if, given the interest rates here, I see why so many institutions offer that. But they gave me a deadline that I needed to apply. I didn't apply. And then the next month they were hitting me up again. Um, yeah. I've actually seen interest in excess of 100% on some credit cards. La Karencita, who used to live in Querétaro, I believe she's moved. She did a video about like when she was young and how she got into credit cards here in Mexico. Very, very eye opening. Very eye opening. I think I'm not sure what the insurance covers. I don't know if it's fraud or if it's supposed to be like life insurance. I'm not completely sure. Um, and I've never bothered to ask. There is, like in the US, how we have FDIC insurance on accounts. There is something similar here in Mexico, and that's something else, particularly if you are going to keep large sums of money in your foreign bank account. That is something that you would want to look into is are there any kind of guaranteed protections on those funds, on those accounts? What are the limits if the bank were to go under or something like that? There is one here, and the amount that they insure is not on parity with the equivalent that the FDIC insures. That much I know, but I make it a point never to keep that much money in my foreign bank account. Um, because I'm a scaredy cat and I've heard too many stories. I rarely keep more in there than like a month's worth of expenses, just because that's one less thing I got to try and keep tabs on. All right. So yes, we talked number two, we were talking about assuming that banking works the same way because it might not. Now, number three, this is a big mistake. And again, it kind of goes back to that same line of thinking about like, I want to cut ties with the US. I don't want to be connected anymore. Some people move everything to their overseas address. I kind of see this with this becomes a problem for multiple reasons. Um, Trying to keep a US bank account open, but your address on record is an international address, that could complicate things. I am not saying that it will 100%, but it may make things more difficult. Um, and so I would also caution you because mail does not work the same as it does in the US in other places. I've told this story on multiple videos. When I used to live in Honduras, I did not know before I got there that they don't have on addresses. Well, technically, some people have addresses, but they don't mean anything. So, for instance, on my street, the houses had numbers, but the numbers were not in sequential order. Like when you built your house, you got to pick whatever number you wanted. People didn't really use the names of streets on street signs very much either. So imagine you have changed your address on all of your banking, all of your important things. And like when I lived in Honduras, my address was like next to the school, brown gate, brown gridded gate, because it was like a grid, and so that was my address. And so I would give the city, I would give the name of the colonia, and it turned out that my colonia, my neighborhood had like a name that nobody knew that was the name of it. It had a name very similar to another neighborhood. And so anytime I told somebody where I lived, I'd have to give them like a point of reference, like, oh, next to such and such grocery store or whatever. So yeah, so imagine there's not even a mail service in Honduras. So like how I was going to get mail, there were two times I think I actually got something in the mail. But there were times like I initially changed my address on my Fidelity account because I was trying to get a new debit card. And Fidelity is one of those places that they will only mail it to the address on record. So I changed my address on record. I never got that ATM card. Didn't happen. So so if you're having all of your important mail sent to you, it may not get there. I mean, I live in a country now that has a mail service, and there have been items that should have gotten to me here that never did, or like a T-shirt I ordered. And what often happens if let's say I ordered it from somebody in the US and it has tracking on it, the tracking stops at the Mexican border. So I knew when it got to Mexico. After that, they were just like, give it 2 weeks. And if it doesn't show up, call us back then. You don't want that kind of mail service dealing with your important documents. So, if it's far better to get a mail service, I used to have one of those, but I stopped getting a whole lot of mail, or having a trusted friend or family member serve as your mailing address. Um, but definitely, I don't think you wanna give up having a US address. It's gonna make your life difficult in ways you don't expect. Yes, I was so perplexed by this because me being from the US, I would say like, "Oh, it's such and such number on this street," and people were looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" Like, that is useless information. I remember opening Google Maps one time to try and figure out how to get somewhere, and it was just arrows with no words. It was like, "Right turn in so many meters," but there was never a street name there. It was wild. It was wild. Um, this is true as well. Some banks do not like PO boxes, and so that can be difficult. And then there is also the issue of some financial organizations do not want to deal with the additional paperwork and documentation that Uncle Sam makes them do when someone is outside the US, because again, they want to make sure you're not money laundering. And so you'll find that financial institutions will often be like, we don't work with people who live overseas. And I have heard multiple stories of folks getting a letter, let's say from Vanguard, and Vanguard being like, "You don't live in the US anymore. We need you to liquidate this account." Um, I have, like I said, so far, Fidelity never gave me an issue with that, but that is an additional reason why I use a US address for everything, and I also I have a US phone number, um, that I kept. This is a good question. Having a local bank account, is it required to attain a visa? This is going to vary by country. In Mexico, no, because the vast majority of Mexicans are unbanked. But if, let's say, I know for Portugal, you need to have a bank account. I believe, is it France or is it Spain? I may be confusing them, but there are countries that do require you to have a full bank account as part of the visa process. So that is something to keep in mind. Many of the times that I moved to different countries, I was there working and I was going to get paid. So having a local bank account was a must because I wanted to get paid. Okay, just going back to see. Okay, I think we answered this. Maintaining a US address, either use a family member or a friend or pay for a service. When I first left the US, I wanted to maintain uh, a domicile in the state of Texas because state of Texas does not have state income tax. And so when I got my mail forwarding service, I specifically wanted to have a Texas address. I specifically wanted to have a Houston address. And I mean, at the time, though, this was 8 years ago, it was a couple of $100 a year. So it wasn't like cost prohibitive. It's just that after you're gone for a while and you stop getting junk mail and you've opted to have online statements for most things that you can, you realize you don't get a whole lot of mail. And so I found myself having the mail forwarding service send things to my cousin so that she could handle them for me, and I was like, why am I paying them? I could just have the mail go to her house. So that's number 3. Um, Number 4 is not staying on top of, like, your credit and identity theft, not protecting it. I did a video not too long ago about and mentioned the fact that really, if you're outside the US and not actively applying for a loan or new credit cards, you should have your credit frozen. Um, and so, because it's very easy, particularly if you're living in a very, very different time zone, very far away from the US, to not be on top of things like monitoring your credit report and stuff like that. And so, if you have your credit frozen, no one can open new lines of credit in your name because it's frozen. Now, freezing your credit is not permanent. You can thaw your credit so that you can make applications if you need to, but ignoring it and not doing it, that's a big mistake that could easily bite you in the butt. Think about how, like, 10 years ago, identity theft was wild and crazy. Now, with all of this AI stuff, I would imagine it's so much more easy now for people to do that. And think about it, if you're not around, uh, if you're not getting your mail, you personally, it's very easy to miss something that might alert you that something's going on. You could choose to pay for a credit monitoring service. Um, I would check with your various credit card issuers because they might have some kind of credit monitoring as part of the benefits of having that card. So there's no need to go out and pay for something additional. Um, this is a good question. If you have a mail service, will it allow you to get or renew a driver's license? That is an excellent question. I would, s- I would wonder, what are the requirements in your state? Is your state someplace that needs proof of the address, like a utility bill, something like that, because in that case, I don't think the mail service would work. Um, I did use my mail service. I lost a license, and you know how well, I don't know if you know, in my state, I can request like a copy of my existing license, a replacement through the mail, and they mailed it to the mail forwarding people, and then they mailed it to me. So I think it would depend on what are the requirements in your state and whether or not you have to prove through like a utility bill or something that you actually live there. Okay. Um, can we temporarily unfreeze our credit from overseas? You should be able to. Now, you can lock credit or freeze credit. Freezing credit is free, but it is also so if you pay for a credit lock, if you get a credit lock, you got to pay for that. Unlocking credit is faster than thawing credit, but not exorbitantly so. So where a credit unlock, I believe, should be instant, thawing your credit might take a couple of days. Okay, but again, unfreezing your credit. Okay, D says that unfreezing credit can take a few minutes and it's done online. So yes, you should be able to. It's not a permanent thing. Okay. And then number 5 is this is the mistake. I get why people make it. I just don't think it's a smart thing to do. Some folks just say, F them credit cards, F Visa, F everybody. And don't try to fix the credit problem. Or they're like, I'm leaving. I ain't paying none of these people anymore. They chuck the deuces at the US and not worried about it. And you may have every intention on never returning to the US, but you just don't know what the future holds. And so, why make it difficult for yourself if there is a chance that you have to go back? So, whether the credit was already bad and you were just like, who cares? They don't have credit scores in Mexico. I'm not going to deal with that, or if you let the credit get bad while you left. Either way, like I said, I understand why some people are like, I am leaving, I am getting a new life. I'm not worried about those debts. Um, and again, I'm definitely not the person to tell you to like get super wrapped up in like, oh, my credit score has to be X and I've got to make sure I don't dip down a point or two because there is so much more to life than your credit score. But you at least want to maintain some level of credit worthiness in the eyes of the credit bureaus in your home country on the off chance that you might have to go back or you might have to do something for a relative who is back home, like your mama's house need a new roof. She doesn't have the money for it because she is on a fixed income. You are living on less overseas, but what you do have is credit. And so you can pay for the roof in monthly payments. But if you have, you know, just let the credit go to hell, then that's an option you no longer have. And I'm all about keeping as many options open as you can. So those are the 5. And Unc will find you. Absolutely. And particularly if you are going back and you were one of the folks that was like, ain't no way I'm going back. I'm going to guess it's because something unfortunate has happened. So, like, that's even more reason that you would need your credit to be intact while you are making your reentry. Um, this I don't maintain a car in the United States, so when I go back to Texas, I have to rent a car. And renting a car, I will tell you, the fact that I have a Texas driver's license makes things much easier than if I showed up in there with my Mexican driver's license. So I make sure to keep all that ID and everything up to date as well. Because again, I understand how tempting it is to cut all ties, but the reality of our situation in our lives is you just never know when you might need that option available to you. And so it's smart to keep as many options as possible. So I hope that was helpful for somebody. Um, whoop, this you also don't want a judgment placed against you. Yeah, and I don't want anybody who, let's say, the credit picture for them right now isn't great and they are moving abroad and they've got new plans and that sort of thing. I am not saying like let that hold you back. However, or that like, you know, there's part of the price you pay when you mess up on a loan or credit cards or whatever is they ding your credit. And so if you are leaving the US and your credit is a mess, you know, keep your nose clean for 7, 8 years. Let that stuff fall off of your credit report, and don't do anything new that's gonna mess it up. Um, do you make a trip back every 4 years to renew your license, or is that state dependent? Um, that's a good question. I have been abroad for 8 years, and previously, I just renewed online. They mailed my new license to, use the old picture, mailed my new license to my mailing address, and when I was in town, I picked up. But then when they did the real ID, you know how you had to get the star on your license? Um, that time when it expired, they would not let me do it online. I had to physically come in person. It worked out for me because I was between countries and I happened to be stateside, and waited in a long ass line to get it done. So it has been now that you ask that, I need to look at my license because, um, I think the next time that it comes up, I should be able to renew it online. And so I don't know if there is a limit to the number of times you have to renew it online and then you have to physically go in. But the last time I had to physically go in, it was because they were switching to Real ID. And it just worked out for me that I was already in the US. And so I took care of it when I was there. Okay. Seeing. And I do think it varies by states because I know there are a couple of states that it's very easy to get a license in, and you don't really have to be there. All right. Thank y'all for coming to hang out with me tonight. If you are watching in the future, check out the links in the description to some other like move abroad money videos that I think will be helpful to you. Um, if you are planning a move abroad and you're like, hmm, I've got some other money questions. Are you coming to Exodus Summit? It starts on Friday. I will be there. I'll be speaking along with a host of other Black women. You should come. There is a link in the description to get you a ticket. It is not too late. Prices go up on Friday the 11th. All right. I will see y'all then. Bye, guys.